The result of the Eastern elections is a complete disaster for the Traffic Light Coalition. Kubicki now wants to dissolve the Traffic Light Coalition as he believes it has completely lost its legitimacy. But Kevin Kühnert from the SPD is also whining a lot and trying to spin this election disaster in a positive light. And even Ricarda Lang has to not only put a positive spin on this election result, but even drink to it. And this is really a very intense reaction from the Traffic Light Coalition politicians. Let's take a closer look at it. Here we go. Today, we experienced a true electoral earthquake in the East, and the AfD has completely swept the Eastern region. The Traffic Light Coalition, on the other hand, is currently experiencing a major disaster and is being thrown out of all parliaments. The Traffic Light Coalition achieves just 10% combined in both Saxony and Thuringia, resulting in a historically poor election outcome. The FDP is performing so poorly in Saxony that it is no longer even displayed on the graphic. They are being expelled from both state parliaments. The Greens are also being expelled from the state parliament in Thuringia. And that is why it is clear that the FDP is especially furious now and is letting their frustration run free. Bild reported that the FDP vice demands consequences after the election shock. The Traffic Light Coalition has lost its legitimacy. If a significant portion of the electorate indeed denies their approval in this manner, it must have consequences. And Kubicki further stated that people have the impression that this coalition is harming the country and is definitely harming the FDP. Christian Lindner also completely takes stock of the Traffic Light Coalition. He wrote about the results in Saxony and Thuringia as painful, but no one should be deceived 2021. For we will not give up our fight for liberal values. Tomorrow we will continue again. And there is indeed also a lot for the various other parties of the Democratic Center to consider in various aspects. Okay, so actually indeed, Kubicki writes that the Traffic Light Coalition has lost its legitimacy. And indeed, Lindner adds that the other parties also have much to consider significantly. Well, what the two of them are indeed writing here in cryptic words can only clearly and definitely mean one thing: the exit from the Traffic Light Coalition. I mean, the FDP has massively lost votes in really all the elections of recent years. In fact, they have been kicked out of almost all parliaments everywhere. The Traffic Light Coalition is effectively tearing the FDP apart, and if the FDP does not pull the emergency brake now, it will be the end for them, especially with regard to the upcoming federal election. But not only the FDP is completely desperate, but also indeed the Greens. Here you see, for example, a picture of the Green leader Ricarda Lang when she saw the first projections, and apparently the numbers for the Greens are so bad that she has to reach for the bottle right afterwards. But what else can one expect a reaction when they nearly halve their voter support and then get kicked out of the state parliament? But hey, at least Ricarda Lang is sipping a non-alcoholic beer here, so we can spare ourselves the embarrassing comments on Twitter while completely drunk. And of course, indeed, the former kitchen assistant Göring Eckardt must not be missed. They are really going off on social media, especially on Twitter, about the recent election victory of the AfD. On Twitter, she stated that the election in Thuringia is a democratic censorship in this country. For the first time in the history of federal politics, the Höcke AfD is the strongest force in a state parliament, representing a right-wing anti-democratic party. I am very concerned, not about my party. We will pick ourselves up again, we will come back. Yes, I hope not, but for our country. Setbacks are looming for nature, climate, the economy, and a free, diverse society. Oh no, indeed. There are threats of setbacks in diversity and climate. So now, perhaps the gender-neutral toilets will be abolished. This is absolutely unacceptable, and we must reverse this election very immediately. But what's really great is her statement that with this election result, where the AfD is the strongest force, there will be setbacks for the economy. And one has to ask, How is that supposed to work? The Greens have driven our economy into the ground so badly, it can't get any worse than this. But not only the SPD, not only the Greens are suffering from a complete loss of reality, but also the SPD, because the SPD General Secretary Kevin Kühnert has also spoken out and is trying to put a positive spin on this catastrophic result for the SPD and the Traffic Light Coalition. Bild reports further. ARD reporter reacts with surprise. Kühnert puts a positive spin on the SPD's debacle, immediately after the first projections. Shortly after 6 p.m., Kühnert was asked on ARD what lessons the SPD could draw from the state elections. One can learn from this that today is not an evening for celebration for the SPD. Nevertheless, he urged that this result should be fairly assessed. Then the SPD general began to put a positive spin on his party's election results. Both are federal states where the SPD has not had an easy standing in many state elections. They are not our current strongholds. There was a real danger that the SPD would be ousted from the state parliaments in both countries. But that could be averted. In this respect, Kühnert's message for my party is that fighting is worthwhile. We are needed. There are also people who want our policies. This even left the ARD reporter stunned. He then followed up with another question about you, Sandar. This means they don't want to change anything. And this question from the ARD reporter is truly worth its weight in gold. The SPD-led Traffic Light Coalition has suffered a massive catastrophe in the first two Eastern elections. However, the SPD, according to Kevin Kühnert, does not want to change anything. Apparently, he is maximally inspired by Angela Merkel. After all, we live in the best Germany of all time. And this path taken is without alternatives. Well then, dear SPD, just keep going as you have been. And then in 2 weeks, directly receive the next setback in Brandenburg. And in a year, also during the federal elections. Perhaps the SPD under Kevin Kühnert and Olaf Scholz will manage to fail spectacularly in the next 2 weeks, driving the party into the ground before the Brandenburg election and causing a complete collapse in Brandenburg as well. And that's why, my dear viewers, I am now daring to make a prediction. Now, right after the first two elections, the Traffic Light Coalition will not dissolve immediately, but will first wait for the Brandenburg election in 2 weeks. Because the end of the Traffic Light Coalition would completely derail the election campaign for Brandenburg. And since the current forecasts for the Traffic Light Coalition in Brandenburg look just as terrible, especially for the FDP and the Greens, they will pull the emergency brake at the latest after the Brandenburg election. And if the party leaders of the FDP and the Greens refuse, it will lead to a rebellion within their own parties. In the end, one loses hundreds, if not thousands, of well-paid positions in all state parliaments and later in the Bundestag, along with everything that is associated with it, including staff and state secretaries. And that's why I assume that after the Brandenburg election, the Traffic Light Coalition will be over. What do you think about this drastic result today in Thuringia and Saxony? Feel free to share your opinion in the comments under the video.